This is chapter 1 of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I'm doing a super deep dive focusing on spoiling everything. We already know the story. My whole point is that I love the stories. I love everything about them. I love the message. I love the character growths, the character arcs. There's so many of them, and I'm going to dive really, really deep. Maybe not as deep in some places, but focusing on the characters, focusing on the literary callbacks to other books, talking about the growth of characters, and I'm going to focus on each chapter at a time, but I also want to do deep dives into certain characters and the things that I think about them. And I know this is something that a lot of other people already do, but I'm going to do it in a different format. As you can see, I've got the ebook on one side. I've got a free form on the other side. I'm going to take notes. We're going to do some highlights, and just generally talk about this. I'm going to read through it, and as I'm reading, I want to talk about it, my thoughts, kind of some tidbits about the information, and go from there. So let's get started. The Dark Lord ascending. The two men appeared out of nowhere, a few yards apart in the narrow moonlit lane. For a second they stood quite still, wands directed at each other's chests. Then, recognizing each other, they stowed their wands beneath their cloaks and started walking briskly in the same direction. News? Asked the taller of the two. And that's Yaxley, right? The best, replied Severus Snape. The lane was bordered on the left by wild, low-growing brambles, and on the right by a high, neatly manicured hedge. We know they're going to Malfoy Manor, right? The men's long cloaks flapped around their ankles as they marched. Thought I might be late, said Yaxley, his blunt features sliding in and out of sight as the branches of overhanging trees broke the moonlight. It was a little trickier than I expected, but I hope he will be satisfied. You sound confident that your reception will be good, so this is Yaxley thinking he's got the right information, right? Snape nodded, but did not elaborate, so we know what he did, right? We find this out later in the book, in the pensieve, right? They turned right into a wide driveway that led off the lane. The high hedge curved with them, running off into the distance beyond a pair of impressive wrought iron gates barring the men's way. Now, I think it's interesting with all these details about these houses in the world, and it'd be interesting to kind of draw this and see what it might look like. Neither of them broke step. In silence, both raised their left arms in a kind of salute and passed straight through, as though the dark metal were smoke. Now, I want to look at this real quick. So, there was a wrought iron gate, right? So, let's find that. Wrought iron gates barring the men's way, right? So, let's highlight that. Neither of them broke step, so they didn't stop, right? But in silence, they both raised their left arms. So we know this is where the dark mark is, right? The dark mark is on their left arm in a kind of salute and passed straight through. So this is kind of like in the sixth book where none of the army of the Order of the Phoenix or Dumbledore's army could get up into the tower when they were battling. But Snape ran right through the barrier, right? This is the same thing, right? Their dark marks are allowing them to just get straight through this protection. And keep reading ahead, as though the dark metal were smoke, right? So this is kind of a great literary description here. Is really, really interesting to watch, to listen, read, I guess. The yew hedges muffled the sound of the men's footsteps. There was a rustle somewhere in their right. Yaxley drew his wand, pointing it over his companion's head. But the source of the noise proved to be nothing more than a pure white peacock strutting majestically along the top hedge. Now this reminds me of the sixth book when Bellatrix killed the fox, right? They're always like scared of something. So this is kind of a ongoing narrative where the Death Eaters are kind of scared of everything, right? Anything and everything. They're always like worried. And like, Bellatrix thought the fox was somebody. And so she just straight up killed it. Good thing he actually didn't kill the peacock. I don't think Malfoy would be happy, but he probably couldn't even tell at this point. Moving on. He always did himself well, Lucius. Peacocks. He actually thrust his wand back under his cloak with a snort. And I really love Stephen Fry's rendition of the audiobook. He does this so brilliantly. If you haven't listened to it, you need to listen to Stephen Fry's audiobook versions. And I honestly cannot wait for the new versions with an entire ensemble to come out. A handsome manor house grew out of the darkness at the end of a straight drive, lights glinting in the diamond-panned downstairs windows. Somewhere in the dark garden, beyond the hedge, a fountain was playing. That's interesting, a fountain was playing. Anyway, gravel crackled beneath their feet as Snape and Yaxley sped toward the front door, which swung inward at their approach. So it just straight up opened, though nobody had visibly opened it. This is probably part of the magic of the house. They already knew it was them. The hallway was large, dimly lit, and sumptuously decorated with magnificent carpet covering most of the stone floor. The eyes of the pale-faced portraits on the walls followed Snape and Yaxley as they strode past. The two men halted at a heavy wooden door leading into the next room, hesitated for the space of a heartbeat, then Snape turned the bronze handle. The drawing room was full of silent people, sitting at a long, ornate table. The room's usual furniture had been pushed carelessly up against the walls. I always think it's funny when everybody can do magic, or it's like Dumbledore comes up and he's like, "Oh, I need a chair." Here's a chair out of nowhere, right? But it's like you've got all this usual furniture, and it's like, why don't they just like disappear it, like Evanesco it, or like do something to it instead of just like pushing it away? This kind of stuff is really interesting to me. Illumination came from the roaring fire beneath a handsome marble mantelpiece, surmounted by a gilded mirror. Snape and Yaxley lingered for a moment on the threshold as their eyes grew accustomed to the lack of light. They were drawn upward to the strangest features of the scene, an apparently unconscious human figure hanging upside down over the table, revolving slowly, as if suspended by an invisible rope, and reflected in the mirror and in the bare, polished surface of the table below. Now, this is an interesting differentiation. So this figure is hanging upside down, right? In the movie, it showed her like laying horizontally, but in this, it's the figure's hanging upside down. So obviously, Voldemort's used Levicorpus on her, right? Like they did in the fourth book with the Muggles. So it's interesting that we always see like the same kind of spells being used by everybody throughout this, and the author always does this too. It's like never names random spells or does different things. It's always very similar things. So none of the people seated underneath this singular sight was looking at it except for a pale young man sitting almost directly below it. He seemed unable to prevent himself from glancing upward every minute or so. This is Draco, right? And I have a lot to say about Draco in this book, especially in this chapter, because maybe a lot more in book 6, because Draco's situation right now is really terrifying, right? He's spent his entire summer like around Voldemort. Maybe not the whole time, but it's like now his house is being taken over by Voldemort, and now he's got, prisoners there, right? And he's got the Charity, what's her name, Charity Burbage or something, who's hanging there. He's got Ollivander downstairs in the cellar. Wormtail is like living there. It sucks for him, seriously. Okay, Yaxley. Snape said a high, clear voice from the head of the table. You are very nearly late. Now, this is kind of interesting. Like, how does this get organized? Does Voldemort just be like, we're meeting at 3 o'clock, be there, and like everybody shows up early, and everybody just sits there quietly waiting, and Yaxley and Snape show up like just on time? It's kind of weird if you think about meetings and kind of related to it. Normally like Voldemort would be like, he'd come in last or something, but he's always like one of those bosses that like isn't afraid to say he's wrong sometimes, and it's kind of interesting. And he mentions that a little bit coming up to him. The speaker was seated directly in front of the fireplace, so that it was difficult at first for the new arrivals to make out more than his silhouette. So he's like right in front of the fireplace. As they drew nearer, however, his face shone through the gloom. Hairless, snake-like, with slits for nostrils and gleaming red eyes whose pupils were vertical. It'll be interesting to see how they portray Voldemort in the upcoming TV show. I wonder if it'll be more like this, because they didn't do vertical pupils. And I don't believe his eyes were red, but his nostrils were slits basically, but no vertical pupils. It'll be really cool to see if they do that. He was so pale that he seemed to emit a pearly glow. Severus here, said Voldemort, indicating the seat on his immediate right. Yaxley beside Dolohov. The two men took their allotted places. Most of the eyes around the table followed Snape, and it was to him that Voldemort spoke first. So clearly Snape is like his number one guy, right? So, Snape says, My lord, the Order of the Phoenix intends to move Harry Potter from the current place of safety on Saturday next at nightfall. All right, switch pages. The interest around the table sharpened palpably. Some stiffened, others fidgeted, all gazing at Snape and Voldemort. Saturday at nightfall, repeated Voldemort. His red eyes fastened upon Snape's black ones with such intensity that some of the watchers looked away, apparently fearful that they themselves would be scorched by the ferocity of the gaze. Right, so these guys are terrified to even look at Voldemort. Snape, however, looked calmly back into Voldemort's face. And this is interesting too, because Snape he's the best at occlumency, obviously. And so he's not afraid to look at Voldemort and be super calm. Plus, in this instant, he's actually giving legit information, right? So it's even easier for him. After a moment or two, Voldemort's lipless mouth curved into something like a smile. So it's interesting how they mention that he doesn't really have lips, right? Good, very good. And this information comes... And Snape says, from the source we discussed, says Snape. And this is Mundungus Fletcher, remember? So we find out later in the Pensieve that Snape had confronted Mundungus. And this is where he gets the information, but also plants the information about the Seven Potters. And the Seven Potter idea, right? That was Snape's idea. So we learn a lot of this stuff later on in the book. And Snape is also getting this information from Dumbledore. right? We learn in the pensieve that Snape is talking to Dumbledore at this time, around this time, which means Snape is getting into Hogwarts somehow and talking to Dumbledore through the portrait, through Dumbledore's portrait. My lord. So Yaxley is interrupting. Yaxley leaned forward to look down the long table at Voldemort and Snape, all faces turned to him. My lord, I have heard differently. So Yaxley is pretty prideful, right? Yaxley waited, but Voldemort did not speak, so he went on. Dawlish the Auror lets slip that Potter will not be moved until the 30th, the night before the boy turns 17. Snape was smiling. My sources told me that there are plans to lay a false trail. This must be it. No doubt a Confundus charm has been placed upon Dawlish. It would not be the first time. He is known to be susceptible. So it's interesting how Voldemort knows, right? Knows about Mundungus, right? We know that's Mundungus Fletcher. And so it's interesting, like, what kind of story did Snape tell Voldemort? Did he tell him, like, yeah, I confunded Mundungus and he told me everything? Is that it? And so it's interesting to think about, right? I assure you, my lord, Dawlish seemed quite certain, said Yaxley. See, Yaxley's kind of a dope. If he has been confunded, naturally he is certain, said Snape. I assure you, Yaxley, the Auror Office will play no further part in the protection of Harry Potter. The Order believes that we have infiltrated the Ministry. The Order's got one thing right then, eh? Said a squat man sitting a short distance from Yaxley. He gave a wheezy giggle that was echoed here and there along the table. Right, so they've got people in the Ministry. Voldemort did not laugh. His gaze had wandered upward to the body revolving slowly overhead, and he seemed to be lost in thought. Wonder what he's thinking about, right? My lord, Yaxley went on, Dawlish believes an entire party of Aurors will be used to transfer the boy. Voldemort held up a large white hand, and Yaxley subsided at once, watching resentfully as Voldemort turned back to Snape. So he's watching Voldemort resentfully. Interesting, huh? What are they going to hide? Where are they going to hide the boy next? So, at the home of one of the Order, said Snape. The place, according to the source, has been giving every protection that the Order and Ministry together could provide. I think that there's little chance of taking him once he is there, my lord. Unless, of course, the Ministry has fallen before next Saturday, which might give us the opportunity to discover and undo enough of the enchantments to break through the rest. So this is an interesting one to go over. At the home of the Order. Snape damn well knows where Harry's going to be. He knows. He knows that Harry's going to eventually go to the Burrow, right? And the thing is Snape is withholding so much information here, and he is also setting Voldemort up, kind of planting the idea that Voldemort won't be able to get him. I think the little chance of taking him once he is there. So unless, and then this kind of goes into the future, like around the wedding, when they are trying to undo. Once they take the Ministry, they kind of know what enchantments there are, and I guess it makes it easier to break through them. So moving on, well, Yaxley, Voldemort called down the table, the firelight glinting strangely in his red eyes. Will the Ministry have fallen by next Saturday? So Voldemort's really following what Snape is saying, right? Like, Snape is just straight up leading him on this journey. Once again, all heads turned. Yaxley squared his shoulders. "My lord, I have good news on that score. I have, with difficulty, and after great effort," you see how he's trying to get a win here, "succeeded in placing an imperious curse upon pious thickness." So he's the current, what do you call that? Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement right now. Many of those sitting around Yaxley looked impressed. His neighbor Dolahoff, a man with a long twisted face, clapped him on the back. So why is this? It's interesting why it's so impressive, right? Like, can't you just follow him to his house, right? Well, did Yaxley get into the ministry and like secretly put this on? Like, obviously you can do curses without saying them. Maybe you have to say the unforgivable curses. I don't think we ever hear somebody do a crucio or something without saying it, but why couldn't he just do it at his house? So I don't know. All right, so "It is a start," said Voldemort, "but Thickness is only one man. Scrimgeour must be surrounded by our people before I act. One failed attempt on the minister's life will set me back a long way." That's interesting how it takes Voldemort so long to do things. Right. "Yes, my lord, that is true. But as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Thickness has regular contact not only with the minister himself, but also with the heads of all the other ministry departments. It will, I think, be easy now that we have such a high-ranking official under our control to subjugate the others, and then they can all work together to bring Scrimgeour down." So basically, if you Imperious one person, you can Imperious everybody else with them. Interesting. And I wonder how it works, because like later on when Harry uses the Imperious Curse in Gringotts, right, he has to like keep like pointing his wand at people. Like when he tells Yaxley later to hide, for example, he pointed his wand at Yaxley again to tell him to hide, right? So it's like, how often do you have to give these people instructions when you do the Imperious Curse, right? Really interesting to think about. "As long as our friend Thickness is not discovered before he has converted the rest," said Voldemort. "At any rate, it remains unlikely that the ministry will be mine before next Saturday. If we cannot touch the boy at his destination, then it must be done while he travels." Okay, so Voldemort has fallen for Snape's idea, basically. So, "We are at an advantage there, Lord," said Yaxley, who seemed determined to receive some portion of approval. "We now have several people planted within the Department of Magical Transport. If Potter apparates or uses the flu network, we shall know immediately." So this is interesting that I wonder, so if Potter apparates, right, so if he apparates or if he uses the flu network, so originally Mad-Eye was going to come and do a side-along apparition. This is really curious to me. Does the ministry know every single time when someone apparates? That is such a curious thing to me. Obviously, like the flu network, it's kind of like this weird network that people can like monitor, right? They were monitoring it in the 5th book when Umbridge was there. But it's like these kind of things is like, if they can monitor apparition, it's very curious to me. But they have things like the trace. So moving on. "He will not do either," said Snape. "The order is eschewing any form of transport that is controlled or regulated by the ministry. They mistrust everything to do with the place." Now obviously controlled or regulated by the ministry. Now, after Harry gets to Tonks's house. They used a port key to go from there to the burrow. So obviously a port key is not controlled or regulated. But do you remember in the 5th book when Dumbledore made a port key in front of the minister and he's freaking out? Is it because you can't trace them? It's really interesting. So obviously you can't monitor the port key, but they can monitor apparition. This is interesting because maybe it's only because he has a trace that they can do this one, right? I'm gonna guess that this one is because of the trace. So let's highlight that there. Potter, they're gonna know the Potter apparates because he has the trace on him. And if he does it before he's 17, right when he turns 17, the thing breaks. They could have timed it just right, but I guess whatever. So, moving on. All the better, said Voldemort. He will have to move in the open. Easier to take by far. Have to move in the open. Interesting plan, I think, seriously. We'll talk more about it later when they actually do it. Again, Voldemort looked up at the slowly revolving body as he went on. I shall attend to the boy in person. There have been too many mistakes where Harry Potter is concerned. Some of them have been my own. Now, this is the interesting part where Voldemort, takes, in front of other people, admits his mistakes. And he did that in the 4th book, too, when he was talking about how he couldn't kill Harry Potter. He's like, I didn't consider love type of thing, but I thought of it now because I have his blood in me, right? So anyway, that Potter lives is due more to my errors, right? That thing again, my errors, than to his triumphs. This would be interesting, right? It's interesting, trying to kind of put it off. It's not because Harry is good. And honestly, if you think about it, up until now, there have been many mistakes where Harry Potter is concerned. Potter lives is more my errors. So what are his errors? Right? One of his errors, let's highlight this thing. His errors. What was his error at the beginning, right? It's because of love. And so the killing curse backfired. Backfiring. Killing curse. Okay, you're just going to have to listen to my voice for that one. What's the next one? In the 4th book, what's his error? Harry escaped, right? But the error is the twin cores, right? Twin cores. And Praetorian Incantatem, right? Up until this point, what else is there? 5th book, 6th book. He didn't escape from Voldemort in the 6th. 5th book. Hold on. Twin cores. That was the 4th book, right? This is the first. Let's not say first book. 0 book. 5th book. He got away because of Dumbledore. Dumbledore was there. Dumbledore. And they battled, but Voldemort possessed him, right? Possessed. I can't spell it, but Voldemort possessed Harry, but he couldn't stay there, right? And that's also love, right? So Harry was able to throw him off because of his love and his feeling toward his friends and toward Sirius and things like that, right? So he got away. Is that an error? The error is what Dumbledore said before. I was like, you don't know what love is, right? And so, but Voldemort wouldn't be himself if he knew what love was, right? 6th book, I don't recall. Harry didn't escape from Voldemort in the 6th book at all. So it's these things. The backfiring killing curse. I suppose another error back in the 1st book is Quirrell, right? But that was also love, right? Because Quirrell couldn't touch Harry, right? And Harry like burned his face, burned him because of that love, the sacrifice inside of that Lily gave, and Dumbledore says in his skin, right? So we got love a lot here, right? He got out because of love, got out because of love again. Fifth, he got out because of love again, right? The twin cores is like a completely separate one, right? Like he got away because of the twin cores there. And kind of, and his parents were there also, but the twin cores is what sparked it. So he had that, right? And we're going to find out in a few minutes in the next chapters, right, that the twin cores help him again, right, in the 7th book. And not in the way that we think, because it's not Harry's wand versus Voldemort's wand. It's actually Harry's wand versus Lucius's wand. Whoa, we're off screen over there, aren't we? But Dumbledore told Harry that when they had the Priori Incantatem before, that Harry's wand got some of Voldemort's magic, right? It took some of that magic. And that is what shot out at Lucius Malfoy's wand, right? So the error here is that there's that same thing again, is that like, and Voldemort will mark him as his equal, right? So this is another part of this, is that Voldemort is again giving more power to Harry. And that's really, really interesting. Like he's, through the Horcrux, basically inside Harry can see into Voldemort's mind. He's got some of Voldemort's magic imbued in his own wand that destroyed Lucius's thing, right? So there's a lot of errors to think about. They're really, really fascinating, I think. So let's move on. All right, I think this is where we're at. The company around the table. How many pages do we have left? Anyway. The company around the table watched Voldemort apprehensively, each of them, by his or her expression, afraid that they might be blamed for Harry Potter's continued existence. Voldemort, however, seemed to be speaking more to himself than to any of them, still addressing the unconscious body above him. And this is the kind of sign where he's not confiding in them. He's talking to himself. And like even this, he's just talking to himself. Right, because they're not his friends. So he doesn't care about them. I have been careless, and so have been thwarted by luck and chance. And he's blowing off his errors as luck and chance, right? Like here he is complaining again. Luck and chance. And he calls it those wreckers of all but the best laid plans. So he's saying that luck and chance are the wreckers of all but the best laid plans. Interesting, right? So basically, is he saying that his plans are not the best laid plans because luck and chance thwarted him? Was it lucky that he had a twin core? I don't think it is. Because Voldemort had the Phoenix Wand first, right? And the second Phoenix Wand sensed a little bit of Voldemort in Harry. That's not luck. It chose Harry, right? There's no chance at all in any of these things. Like the love, that's not chance. His mom sacrificed herself for him. That wasn't chance. So, but it's interesting to see how he tries to play down what happened. But I know better now. I understand those things that I did not understand before. I must be the one to kill Harry Potter, and I shall be. I must be the one to kill Harry Potter, and I shall be. That's interesting. Anyway, this is interesting because he didn't kill Dumbledore. He had Snape kill Dumbledore. Because you know what? Voldemort couldn't have killed Dumbledore, right? So he had somebody else do it. And the biggest failure of Voldemort is him doing it himself, right? It's really interesting because if Voldemort, even if he heard that prophecy and it's like, oh, the only one who can defeat me is a little baby right now. So you know what I'm going to do? Hey, Snape, go kill that baby. Right? And then poof, he'd be dead. Right? Or maybe no, he wouldn't have killed Lily, but that's somebody else. Right? And then like, let's say the same exact thing happened, but it was Yaxley. Right? And poof, Yaxley's dead, but also all the Potters are dead too, right? So Harry's a little baby, and then Voldemort's like, holy shit, what happened? Like, okay, now Harry has a protection against Yaxley, not Voldemort. So this is the funniest thing is because if Voldemort just had somebody else kill him, he would have been dead a long time ago. It's interesting. And this, I know better now. This is the information he's got from Ollivander, right? I know better now. I need to use somebody else's wand. Okay. So at these words, seemingly in response to them, a sudden wail sounded, a terrible drawn-out cry of misery and pain. Right? That's Ollivander. Maybe he's listening. He's like, oh no, what have I done? Many of those at the table looked downward, startled, for the sound had seemed to issue from below their feet. Yeah, Ollivander's in the dungeon. Wormtail, said Voldemort, with no change in his quiet, thoughtful tone. Oh, I said it loud. And without removing his eyes from the revolving body above, have I not spoken to you about keeping our prisoner quiet? Yes, my lord, gasped a small man halfway down the table, who had been sitting so low in his chair that it had appeared at first glance to be unoccupied. Now he scrambled from his seat and scurried from the room, leaving nothing behind him but a curious gleam of silver. Now this is his hand. So this is kind of the thing I'm going to point out a lot in the book, because this is the foreshadowing. It's always, always, always happening throughout all of these books. Okay, so now we have the first taste of his hand. The hand that Voldemort made for him in book 4. And we're going to find out later about that hand. So we've got the setup. Here it is. Poof. Curious gleam of silver. Right, we might hear about it again, but instead of just hearing about it when it kills him, we hear about it first. So this foreshadowing. But also I love how he calls him Wormtail because it's so funny. Instead of this was his nickname. This is what his friends called him. But Voldemort's calling him this as an insult. It's a complete insult. I just love it. So as I was saying, continued Voldemort, looking again at the tense faces of his followers, I understand better now. I shall need, for instance, to borrow a wand from one of you before I go to kill Potter. Okay. So he knows better now. I shall need, for instance, to borrow a wand, right? For instance. For example. So he knows more than this. It doesn't sound like it, but he's trying to sound lofty. And like he knows more. And there's more things that he knows, but he actually only knows the one thing. And it's to borrow a wand. Well, I guess he knows about the twin cores, so that's why Ollivander told him to use another wand, right? The faces around him displayed nothing but shock. He might have announced that he wanted to borrow one of their arms. Now, the interesting thing is, he needs to borrow a wand from one of you. The thing that's so weird to me is that people only have one wand, right? And I guess it makes sense because, you're learning from one another, and Ollivander talks about it later, but it's like, if you lose your wand, you're screwed. Why not have a second one ready to go? Even if you hardly ever use it, having a backup is important, right? Why couldn't, Voldemort just have Ollivander make him a new wand? Right? Why did he have to use one of the other people's wands? Right? Especially, this really shows Voldemort's utter lack of wand lore knowledge. He doesn't know that the wand chooses the wizard. Maybe he heard it once or before, but I don't think he thought that was important. He doesn't realize that the wand and the wizard kind of go together. So if you use a weak wizard's wand, you have a weak wand. Right? So Lucius Malfoy is not some really great wizard, right? But also, it was destroyed with Voldemort's own magic, basically. But it's really interesting. If it was his own wand, with the twin cores and all, if it was a different wand, just hey, Ollivander, make me a new wand that's not a twin core. Give me a dragon heartstring wand or something. Whatever. That's so weird to me. And I want to talk a lot about wands, too. No volunteers, said Voldemort. Let's see. Lucius, I see no reason for you to have a wand anymore. Lucius Malfoy looked up. His skin appeared yellowish and waxy in the firelight, and his eyes were sunken and shadowed. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. My lord? Your wand, Lucius. I require your wand. Malfoy glanced sideways at his wife. Now here's some foreshadowing that we're going to see. She was staring straight ahead, quite as pale as he was, her long blonde hair hanging down her back, but beneath the table, her slim fingers closed briefly on his wrist. At her touch, Malfoy put his hand into his robes and withdrew a wand and passed it along to Voldemort, who held it up in front of his red eyes, examining it closely. So this is, we're introduced to Narcissa Malfoy again here, staring straight ahead, right? She's trying to keep her mind away from Voldemort because she's practicing. She's getting ready. What is it, my lord? Whispered Malfoy. Elm, my lord, whispered Malfoy. And the core, dragon heartstring. It's interesting that Voldemort can't detect this, right? Because in the movie, Voldemort's detecting it. He's like, "Do I detect elm?" And then he asks, "And the core?" And then Lucius says it, right? But in here, Voldemort has no idea. So this is interesting to me too. It's hey, he can't even tell what the wood is, but Ollivander can determine it instantly. But Ollivander, he knows every wand, right? Anyway, Malfoy, I read that. Good, said Voldemort. He drew out his own wand and compared the lengths. That's weird. Lucius Malfoy made an involuntary movement. For a fraction of a second, it seemed he expected to receive Voldemort's wand in exchange for his own. The gesture was not missed by Voldemort, whose eyes widened maliciously. This is hilarious, though. He compared the lengths. That is so weird. Give you my wand, Lucius? My wand? Some of the throng sniggered. So they're going to humiliate them, right? I have given you your liberty, Lucius. Is that not enough for you? But I have noticed that you and your family seem less than happy of late. What is it about my presence in your home that displeases you, Lucius? Nothing, my lord. Such lies, Lucius. See, Lucius cannot block his thoughts at all. Voldemort can tell everybody's lying when they're lying, right? Except people like Snape and Narcissa, as we'll find out. The soft voice seemed to hiss on even after the cruel mouth had stopped moving. One or two of the wizards barely repressed a shudder as the hissing grew louder. Something heavy could be heard sliding across the floor beneath the table. The huge snake emerged to climb slowly up Voldemort's chair. It rose seemingly endlessly and came to rest across Voldemort's shoulders. Its neck, the thickness of a man's thigh. Its eyes, with their vertical slits for pupils, unblinking. Voldemort stroked the creature absently with long, thin fingers, looking at Lucius Malfoy. Okay, so we're introduced to the snake here. And we're gonna... It's important later, obviously. But it's weird that suddenly Nagini just shows up. I don't know why. It just fit into this, right? Why do the Malfoys look so unhappy with their lot? Is my return, my rise to power, not the very thing they professed to desire for so many years? Well, the Malfoys only want power. And Voldemort is taking over their home. They are completely out of power because they failed him so many times. Of course, my lord, said Lucius Malfoy. His hand shook as he wiped sweat from his upper lip. We did desire it. We do. See, we did it, and then we do. It's funny. He can't hold himself together at all. To Malfoy's left, his wife made an odd, stiff nod, her eyes averted from Voldemort and the snake. To his right, his son, Draco, who had been gazing up at the body overhead, glanced quickly at Voldemort and away again, terrified to make eye contact. See, Draco and Narcissa are not looking at Voldemort. My lord, said the dark woman halfway down the table, her voice constricted with emotion. This is Bellatrix, right? It is an honor to have you here in our family's house. There can be no higher pleasure. She sat beside her sister, as unlike her in looks, with her dark hair and heavily lidded eyes, as she was in bearing and demeanor. Where Narcissa sat rigid and impassive, Bellatrix leaned toward Voldemort, for mere words could not demonstrate her longingness for closeness. Now, for those of you who consider the eighth book, not the eighth book, I guess the eighth story, The Cursed Child, is canon, which, you know, I do, it's fine. Bellatrix is pregnant right now with Voldemort's child. What is this? This is July, right? So Bellatrix is going to die sometime in, when is it? After Easter holiday is about a month. Easter is around April, let's say May. Okay, so she's going to die in May. So count backwards from there. She's got to have the baby before that, right? So let's just say she had the baby beginning of April, right? So March, February, January, December, November, October, September, August, July. Interesting. So maybe she gets pregnant now. Because we don't hear about her husband at all, ever. We know that she has a husband somewhere, but after they break out of prison, we never hear from him in the books at all. I don't recall at all. So Bellatrix is like, she's like, I want to get with you. Right? So basically, this is around the time, if she had the baby before she died, right? She's getting pregnant right about now, right? Because this is just a couple, maybe 2 weeks before Harry's birthday, which is the end of July. So, or maybe this is after. It could be right after she got with him, right? Because she's like, oh, like longing, whatever. And Voldemort says, no higher pleasure, repeated Voldemort. His head tilted a little to one side as he considered Bellatrix. That means a great deal, Bellatrix, from you. So maybe after this is her flirting, and, you know, he kind of like took advantage of that, maybe. I don't know. Her face flooded with color, her eyes welled with tears of delight. Right? Her husband can't be around when this is happening, right? My lord knows I speak nothing but the truth. No higher pleasure, even compared... Okay, now he's going to make fun of her here. Even compared with the happy event that, I hear, has taken place in your family this week? She stared at him, her lips parted, evidently confused. I don't know what you mean, my lord. I'm talking about your niece, Bellatrix, and yours, Lucius and Narcissa. She's just married the werewolf, Remus Lupin. You must be so proud. So he is enjoying this humiliation. Like totally humiliating the Malfoys, everything they do. There was an eruption of jeering laughter from around the table. Many leaned forward to exchange gleeful looks. A few thumped the table with their fists. The great snake disliked the disturbance, opening its mouth wide and hissed angrily. But the Death Eaters did not hear it, so jubilant were they at Bellatrix and the Malfoys' humiliation. Bellatrix's face, so recently flushed with happiness, had turned an ugly, blotchy red. So all these guys, the Death Eaters, are just like hating on each other really badly. She is no niece of ours, my lord, she cried over the outpouring of mirth. We, Narcissa and I, have never set eyes on our sister since she married the mudblood. So they're talking about, I don't remember her name, but it's Tonk's mom. And she looks very similar to Bellatrix too. Harry thinks it's Bellatrix later on. Forgot what her name was though. This brat has nothing to do with either of us, nor any beast she marries. What say you, Draco? Asked Voldemort. And though his voice was quiet, it carried clearly through the catcalls and jeers. Will you babysit the cubs? He's even making fun of Draco, right? The hilarity mounted. Draco Malfoy looked in terror at his father, who was staring down into his own lap, then caught his mother's eye. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, then resumed her own deadpan stare at the opposite wall. See, Narcissa's getting ready. She's trying to solve the problems of this family. Enough, said Voldemort, stroking the angry snake. Enough. And the laughter died at once. Many of our oldest family trees become a little diseased over time, he said as Bellatrix gazed at him, breathless and imploring. There again. You must prune yours, must you not, to keep it healthy? Cut away those parts that threaten the health of the rest. Yes, my lord, whispered Bellatrix, and her eyes swam with tears of gratitude again at the first chance. So later on, Tonks is like, yeah, Bellatrix was really trying hard to kill me when they were getting Harry out. You shall have it, said Voldemort, and in your family, so in the world, we shall cut away the canker that infects us until only those of the true blood remain. Okay, this is an interesting point to me that I'll talk about later on too, that I feel is a huge mistake for Voldemort. I don't know why they're letting this blood status get in the way of what's really important. If you think about Grindelwald, he was against Muggles. That's it. He was against Muggles. He wasn't against other magical people, right? He wanted to lead and take over the Muggle world, whereas Voldemort has got this weird thing about blood status. And so, they're rounding up Muggleborns, right? And they're taking away their wands and all this stuff, right? And they're decreasing their numbers for no reason. They're fighting this weird fight against their own people instead of just trying to take over Muggles. So it's so confusing to me that they're getting sidetracked by this. And, I think part of it is that Voldemort is so obsessed with cutting that out from himself as well, because he's half, right? He's the first non-pure blood in his entire line. So he hates it so much, he changed his freaking name to Voldemort from Tom Riddle, and he's just wasting time doing this. We'll talk about it more, I guess, later. Voldemort raised Lucius Malfoy's wand, pointed it directly at the slowly revolving figure suspended over the table, and gave it a tiny flick. The figure came to life with a groan and began to struggle against invisible bonds. "Do you recognize our guest, Severus?" asked Voldemort. Snape raised his eyes to the upside-down face. All of the Death Eaters were looking up at the captive now, as though they had been given permission to show curiosity. As she revolved to face the firelight, the woman said in a cracked and terrified voice, "Severus, help me." "Ah, yes," said Snape, as the prisoner turned slowly away again. "And you, Draco?" asked Voldemort, stroking the snake's snout with his wand-free hand. Draco shook his head jerkily. Now that the woman had woken, he seemed unable to look at her anymore. Draco obviously has seen her. He wasn't in her class, but he's probably seen her. "But you would not have taken her classes," said Voldemort. "For those of you who do not know, we are joined here tonight by Charity Burbage, who until recently taught at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." There were small noises of comprehension around the table. A broad, hunched woman with pointed teeth cackled. "Yes, Professor Burbage taught the children of witches and wizards all about muggles, how they are not so different from us." One of the Death Eaters spat on the floor. Charity Burbage revolved to face Snape again. "Severus, please, please." "Silence," said Voldemort with another twitch of Malfoy's wand. And he can't tell that Malfoy has a weak wand, by the way. And Charity fell silent, as if gagged. Not content with corrupting and polluting the minds of wizarding children, last week Professor Burbage wrote an impassioned defense of mudbloods in the Daily Prophet. Wizards, she said, must accept these thieves of their knowledge and magic. The dwindling of the purebloods is, says Professor Burbage, a most desirable circumstance. She would have us all mate with muggles. Or no doubt werewolves. Gets another jibe in. So this is, again, more of this infighting. Like, he's going to kill her because she wrote an article about muggles. About mudbloods, right? The muggleborns. Right. And these guys are so inbred. It's so hilarious. It's like this infighting makes no sense to me. Seriously. Nobody laughed this time. There was no mistaking the anger and contempt in Voldemort's voice. For the third time, Charity Burbage revolved to face Snape. Tears were pouring from her eyes into her hair. Snape looked back at her, quite impassive, as she turned slowly away from him again. Avada Kedavra. The flash of green light illuminated every corner of the room. Charity fell with a resounding crash onto the table below, which trembled and creaked. Several of the Death Eaters leapt back in their chairs. Draco fell out of his onto the floor. "Dinner, Nagini," said Voldemort softly, and the great snake swayed and slithered from his shoulders onto the polished wood. So maybe that's why Nagini came up to his shoulders, because she knew that she was going to get a meal, right? She lost out on Harry Potter on the 4th book, so now she gets Charity Burbage. All right, we're at the end of the chapter. Kind of want to go over it again. There's a lot to talk about in here, not as much as other chapters. But I figured I'd just start here instead of the other chapters. Like, I'm starting on book 7 because there's a lot of stuff in here, and my whole point is I want to focus on the entire picture, the whole picture. I want to talk about all these little tiny details. I know people nitpick this so much, and I'm just one of 1,000 people who talk about this, but it's something I really wanted to do. I really wanted to talk about this and kind of interact with the community about this because, I love the story. And I could listen to it over and over. Now, the 7th book isn't one of my favorites. I love certain parts of this book, like the ending of this book, is amazing. The last fight between Harry and Voldemort is incredible. I love it a lot, but it's difficult to go back to. And I'll talk about this more, but there's so much action in this book that there's no time to rest. There's no time to chill and relax. Like, some of my favorite parts of the series are those really fun, chill, relaxed things. Like, honestly, like when Luna is commentating for Quidditch. That has nothing to do with moving the story forward, but it is downright hilarious. Freaking hilarious. And I love those parts of the books because the stakes are so low. And this book, unfortunately, doesn't have a lot of that. It is so much business. Like, there's like maybe the ghoul in the closet, like that section is kind of that chill time. Like, Ron is like, oh, he's eating. We should wait. He just ate, you know. Like, I love those chill moments in the books. And when I get to the other books, I'll talk about those parts. But that's chapter 1. Voldemort made some errors, mostly love and the twin cores. But now he knows, right? But he doesn't know that Harry has received a little bit more magic from Voldemort with the Priori Incantatem, but he's going to find out in the next couple chapters. So that's all I got. I'm Patrick. I hope you've enjoyed this kind of podcast style with a little bit of weird stuff on screen. Let me know what you think, and love to hear from you. And hope you're here for the whole journey. All right, check you later.